This has got to be one of my favorite use cases for using AI that I've found in a long time. So let me dive into how you can make a lot of money publishing public domain books with AI in ways that have never been done before. All right, so I've actually had some success in publishing public domain content before in the past. As you can see here over the, since I started doing it, I've made $8,000, which might not seem like a whole lot to a lot of people, but it makes me a consistent about $150 to $200 every single month. And that's without any marketing whatsoever. And I estimate that the amount of time that it took me to make this $8,000 was about 100 hours. So that's, about $84, $85 an hour, which is more than my last 2 jobs paid me. And that's because I was able to just create this thing and set it and forget it. And I've been making consistent sales ever since then. And that number is only going to continue to go up as it just sits there. So as you can see from this graph, I started making this public domain content back here in July of 2019. So a little while ago, about 5 years ago. And I continued to make it public domain content up here until about end of 2021. So you can see this rise here is from all of that public domain content that I put up, and then I stopped. But even though I stopped, you can see I've made consistent sales over the next couple of years since then, even though I haven't made any more public domain content. And the reason I stopped is for a number of reasons, mostly just because I had other things going on with my other jobs at Kindlepreneur. And then eventually I started this channel, and that took a lot of my time. But I am going to be starting to do public domain content again because of AI and what it is allowing me to do now. So let me dive in and show you exactly what I'm doing. And I am actively doing this and showing you the exact prompts that I'm going to be using, that I am using for this use case. Now, to give you a little bit of background here, to make a very long story short, there is a particular public domain text that I have wanted to make available for a long time. I am an Arthurian fantasy writer, and so there's this Arthurian text that I really wanted to make more available, but it's been difficult to do because the only public domain version of it is in French, and not just regular French. We're talking old French. Like imagine the Canterbury Tales, but in French, right? That's kind of what this text is. Additionally, the only versions of the French text that I could find are PDFs, and there's not actually any publicly available text that I can just copy and paste of this French text. The only English version of it is a more modern English translation, and because of that, it is copyrighted and it can't be used, it can't be spread publicly for that reason. And so I thought, what if I could get AI to not only transcribe the French text from these PDFs so I can make an ebook copy of the PDF in a way that doesn't exist before, but I could also use AI to translate that text into something that I could sell a more modern English translation and make it more publicly available. Because to get the English translation that currently exists costs like $400 because it's done through some obscure academic publisher and they really don't pay any attention to it. There's no ebook version of it, so you have to get the actual text. In fact, I have it right here. There's actually about 10 volumes, but here's one of them that we're going to be looking at today. It's called The Story of Merlin, and this single volume cost me about $50-$60, and there's 10 of these, so they are quite expensive to get. And so I created this project here in Claude, as you can see here. It's a very simple project. All I have is this custom instructions here, which says you will be given an image containing text. Your task is to accurately transcribe the text from this image. Keep the following in mind when transcribing. And then I give it a couple of extra instructions, and that's all it is. And so all I have to do is, so I have my folder here with the scans of this PDF. So to give you an idea of what this looks like, it looks like this. There's this French text. There's all of these footnotes here. There's these notes in the margins here. This one doesn't have as many, but sometimes you'll have a lot of footnotes here at the bottom. So it's really crowded. You've got, these line markers here in the text. And so if you used like a traditional OCR scanner software, it would bring in all of that, and there would probably be errors like crazy all over the place. So it'd be very messy. So I created this prompt that would ask it to remove all of that and just focus on the core text. So all I have to do is take this image, plop it into here, and then hit go. And immediately it starts transcribing the text here. And this is the original old French text that we're transcribing here. And it is a little tedious to kind of take all of these images and run it through this process, but it's way easier than I would have been able to do before. And it's easier than paying somebody to transcribe it, especially because I would need someone to be at least somewhat familiar with Old French to be able to transcribe it with any degree of accuracy. And so even though the AI is probably not going to get everything exactly right, just like an OCR software would, it's going to be much better than an OCR software. It's going to be much better than a human transcriber, because a human transcriber who isn't familiar with old French text is likely to have quite a bit of human error in there. And as you can see, it made this very clean text here. This is all French, and it's not including any of those side comments. It's not including any of the footnotes. It's not including any of the footnote references inside of the text, all because of the prompt that I gave it. So all I had to do is copy this, and I take it into a project in Atticus to basically put it all in here. So now I've added it to everything I've added so far. I've already got 40,000 words here of this project that I've been working on. And then I can continue with the next couple of pages and so forth as I go along. So the next step is, well, first of all, I can actually just publish the French version of this. Because like I said, the only versions that have been available of this particular text have been like online scans of PDFs. And so there are no more modern or ebook digital versions of this text existing anywhere. And so I could just publish this French version of the text just as is. But let's say I want to do a little bit more than that. If we were to let's just take these first couple of paragraphs and copy them, and then I bring them into a tool like Novel Crafter, right? So I've copied these first few paragraphs into Novel Crafter. I can select a paragraph, and I've created a prompt that I call Translate, and it's a very simple translation prompt. All of these prompts, by the way, will be available to anybody who wants them. They are available inside of my free newsletter. So if you sign up for my newsletter, you'll get the link to my prompt library that has all of these prompts in it. But all I do is just click this button, Translate, and it runs the prompt that I've created. And it says, in this part, the story says that the enemy was very angry with our Lord when our Lord was in hell and cast out Adam and Eve, as many others as he pleased. When the enemy saw this, they were afraid, etc., etc., etc. So it's giving this big, it's an old text, right? And if I were to take the actual English translation here, the one that's copyrighted, and look at it, I can see that, yeah, the translation is very similar. It's not the exact same, but the meaning is pretty much there. So this first part says, in this part, the story says that the enemy was very angry when our Lord was in hell and cast out Eve and Adam. It says here, in this part of the story, it says the devil grew very angry when after our Lord had gone to hell and freed Adam and Eve and as many others as he pleased. So it's very similar, not quite the same word phrasing, but you can tell that the transcription or the translation here is accurate. So all I would do is I just, continue on to the next couple of paragraphs, hit translate, and boom. And by the way, the translation model that I'm using here is GPT-4o. Seems to be a good one for this kind of accuracy needed in translation. Right, and in just a couple of seconds there, I've got that whole section all translated. And yes, again, this can be a slightly tedious process if you're doing, say, a whole book with this, but it can be extremely rewarding because now we have this translation that has never been very widely available before. And now I can make it available to people in mass, that people that could not have accessed it before because the English translation was only available in physical copies and only available if you had like $400 to spend on it. So that's exactly what I did. So this is the second volume here that I'm currently working on, but I've actually already gone through and done 3 different versions of this story. The first volume that I did, I transcribed it and created this one right here, which is the French edition. Then I created this one right here, which is the English translation edition. And then I created another one here called the Modern English Translation. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's go back to Novel Crafter. And I have created another prompt. If I took this, I have a prompt here that I've called Make It Modern. I'll show you a little bit of what that prompt looks like behind the scenes. So go here to Make It Modern. I'm using Claude 3.5 Sonnet as my main model for this. And the prompt goes something like this. You are tasked with translating an ancient text into a more modern prose edition that a middle schooler could understand. It should be at an 8th grade reading level. This task aims to make the text more accessible to contemporary readers while preserving its core meaning and significance. Follow these instructions carefully. Then I say, here's the text you'll be working with. And it takes the context selection. And then I give it a few extra tips here to improve the accuracy. And what this does is I, take a couple of paragraphs here and I say, make it modern. And now it says, the story tells us that the enemy was very angry when our Lord went to hell and freed Eve, Adam, and many others. When the enemy saw this, they were scared and surprised. They got together and asked, who is this person who can control us so easily? Way more accessible to a modern way of reading. The language is a little simpler. It's easier to understand. And this is really, really important. So I actually created another text using this method. And this text is called The Fairy Queen. Now, I am a big fan of this ancient text called The Fairy Queen. I've actually written a whole fiction series that was loosely based on it. Emphasis on loosely there, if you're a Edmund Spenser purist. But this is an ancient epic poem that was written around the same time that Shakespeare lived. Edmund Spenser, the author, was a contemporary of Shakespeare, and he wrote this epic poem that I think is a criminally underrated poem because it is so epic and the story is awesome. However, it's a little weird, and the prose, or I should say the poetry of it, because it's an epic poem, is dense. It's very difficult to understand. So I'll give you an example here. This is the first verse in the first canto. A gentle knight was pricking on the plain, ye clad in mighty arms and silver shield, wherein old dints of deep wounds did remain, the cruel marks of many a bloodied field, yet arms till that time did he never wield. His angry steed did chide his foaming bit, as much disdaying, see I can't even say it, to the curb to yield, full jolly knight he seemed, and fair did sit as one for knightly gists. See, some of these words are even hard to figure out. And fierce encounters fit. So the spellings are a little bit different because of the ancient time that this was created. By ancient, I mean like Shakespearean time, Renaissance time. And it's kind of difficult to understand what we just read, right? You have to really be paying attention, and you can't just read it and enjoy it, right? It's great poetry, right? It's this like epic high type of poetry. But I created this modern version of it here, which goes something like this. A kind knight was riding across the plain. He wore strong armor and carried a silver shield. The shield had old marks from deep wounds, showing he had been in many bloody battles. However, he had never actually used weapons before. His angry horse was chewing on its metal bit, not wanting to be controlled. The knight looked cheerful and sat well on his horse. He seemed ready for jousting tournaments and fierce fights. So this is a much more understandable version of that verse, right? Now, of course, you lose the poetry, you lose all of that. But when it comes to actually comprehending the text, which is what I care about in this particular situation, it's so much easier. And I did this with AI. AI was able to do this automatically and very, very well. And so I have now published this version of The Fairy Queen Book 1, this modern translation, where basically all I have is I have a summary that I wrote myself. I have the original text here. And then I have the modern translation here, and I just kind of go through each canto that way with those three things. And I was able to publish that, and it's currently available on Amazon. So I'm really excited for this particular use case, especially, and not just translating old public domain text into modern English, but also translating old English texts into a modern prose version of English that is more understandable to us. I think even books that are relatively not that old, like Jane Austen works and stuff like that, could benefit from a modern prose edition to just make it more accessible to teenagers and other people who might have a little bit of difficulty with the language. And I say teenagers, but like people like myself as well. I find these kind of modern editions to be really helpful to understand the core essence of the storytelling in these books. Now, I've only just published some of these, and I've got more that I've got coming, so I don't have any proof yet that they are making money. But since I've seen proof that I can make money with public domain without any of these kind of modifications, without anything special added to them, I'm pretty confident that by adding this additional value, it's going to be even better. And you could take this to the next level as well. You know, I asked it to make a modern prose edition for someone who's at the 8th grade reading level. Well, what if we made something for like a 1st grade reading level, right? You could make a whole children's book just by taking chapters of an ancient text and distilling it down into language that a child could understand. You could even take some AI generated art and add some art in there and create a storybook with some pictures that people can look at, as well as really legible text that still follows the flow of the original text in a way that could be very educational for young people. And I get really excited about that sort of accessibility to literature and reading and all of these things. It's one of those things that I'm most passionate about in my life because, you know, I make so much more money just from this YouTube channel alone than from the public domain stuff that I showed off earlier. But it's definitely one of those things that I'm super passionate about. And I know that if I put just a little bit more work into it, it can make money, but it's really not about the money for me. So I hope this has been an interesting video. If you want to know more, particularly about Novel Crafter, which I was showing earlier, and how to incorporate these prompts into Novel Crafter, I would go check out my full course on Novel Crafter that I created a little while ago, which goes through everything you need to know about the software. And so go check that out, and I will see you in the next video.